Good morning and welcome to Lattes and Leaders with Dr. Brad Johnson, best-selling author and accomplished public speaker specializing in education and educational leadership. I am your co-host, Jeremy Johnson, organizational psychology consultant specializing in career coaching, training, and development. Meet us here each week to discuss topics in education and leadership and meet with some of the top education talent and thought partners from across the globe. So grab your latte, sit back, and enjoy a relaxed conversation that will leave you informed and encouraged.
Good morning and welcome to Lattes and Leaders with me, the host by myself today, Dr. Brad Johnson. And we are fortunate to have a very special guest, Wade Stanford, and he is a superintendent, and we are looking forward to him sharing some of his experience and his journey. So good morning to you.
Good morning, Brad, and thank you so much. It's just an honor to be on here with you and just be able to share and to what I think is important today, to have thought partners, to just kick ideas around and share thoughts and ideas and hopefully, I know I'm going to pick up some things, and hopefully some people that are listening will pick up some things today as we visit.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're so right. A lot of times in more of an informal setting, we get more thoughts and more accomplished than we do in any type of a formal situation. So,
And I agree with that. So we're in Texas. I'm in Westwood ISD out in East Texas, and so we're getting ready to kick off football season. And so our coaches went to what we call coaching school and in San Antonio. And I coached for the first 21 years of my career. And we always kidded at coaching school that there was more learned in the hotel room as coaches got together and started diagramming plays and looking at different things than there was in the actual lectures and things. And I think that same thing happens when educators get together and just in an informal setting, they just start talking about challenges, opportunities, struggles, successes, and then we find solutions in the middle of our conversations.
yeah, absolutely. And I think you're exactly right with coaches, but even teachers too. They have so much knowledge anyway. And so, it's not like they have to be fed stuff like students necessarily, although we don't necessarily with them all the time either. But yeah, giving that opportunity for them to share and talk and spark ideas and things
Oh
like
yeah,
that, it really does make a big difference.
yes it does. Yeah,
So tell us a little bit about your journey and your story and how you got to where you are, and
you
just
bet. Yeah.
anything you want to share with that.
Yeah, so I'm a career educator. Actually, had several teachers that influenced me early on in my career and helped me see that that's what I wanted to do as a career. And I think later on I understood that it was more than a career; it was a calling, and it's a field in which I feel like I, I have the opportunity to impact and to hopefully add value to people. We were in a meeting yesterday with a group working on new employee academy, and I told them there that I've believed this my entire career, that our subjects, our whatever we're teaching, is nothing more than a platform to impact kids and to change kids' behaviors. And they may not remember the content that we share, but they'll remember the way we impacted their lives in there. So started out as a teacher coach for the first 21 years, progressed up to be an athletic director, head football coach the last 7 years, and then took a path into administration and started out as an assistant principal, then a principal, then a director of HR, then assistant superintendent, and now for the last 8 years, the superintendent at Westwood ISD. And Brad, that was intentional in the sense that I knew when I made that shift from athletic director into a campus role that I wanted to sit in a superintendent's chair at some point in time. And I felt like there was a lot of value in knowing the roles and responsibilities, the jobs, the challenges uh, with each one of those positions. And I felt like it was going to help me be a more effective leader And I think that's helped as I've spent the last 8 years doing this, because I truly understand when an assistant principal sits and talks to me and says, "Hey, I'm struggling with this." Well, I've probably have failed 50 times at trying to do that same thing when I was an assistant principal, and so I can tell them 50 ways not to do it, and then we can find a good solution. And so I think there's a lot of pieces there, and I think that may be a little piece that we're missing right now is people are trying to progress so fast, and because of vacancies, people are progressing a little bit faster than what I did.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love that point about I remember I interviewed a CEO a few years ago, and his response was very similar to yours. He's like, I don't know if I can tell you how to be successful, but I can tell you 100 ways to be unsuccessful. And,
Exactly. Yes.
and hopefully that gets you on the right path.
Right.
So I think that's so true. How do you think your coaching experience and maybe even your coaching philosophy influenced your educational leadership experience?
Yeah, I think there's a direct impact there, and so when we look at the coaching piece and what that does, there was a we had a saying, and we believed this when we were coaching. Number one, you're not going to get kids are not going to respond to you. Kids are not going to perform at a level until they know that you truly, truly care about them and that you truly build a relationship. And so with coaching, you spend a lot of time off the field with kids, and you learn how to develop relationships and really deep relationships with your athletes. And so I think from that I found out people truly care about how much you care before they care about how much you know. And so I think there's a piece that as I moved into educational leadership was building those deep relationships, and to the level that you break down a lot of barriers that allow you to have real honest conversations and what goes on. And then there was another piece that we talked about a lot is when we were coaching, we either coached something to happen or we allowed something to happen. So when we saw a mistake on film, our basic philosophy was we're either coaching that to happen or we're allowing that to happen. It's not the athlete's fault. It was our fault as a position coach, as a coordinator, as a head coach. And so I've taken that into my educational leadership. And so when we have a staff member that's not performing at the level that we feel like they need to, we have to self-reflect and look at ourselves as in a leadership role, whether that's a campus or a district level leadership. And we're either coaching it or we're allowing it. And so we have to be slow to get angry and upset with staff and quick to analyze our own expectations and standards and support that goes with that, and then understand why they're not doing it, and not condemn them, but look at ourselves and see how we can change that. So I think that's a couple of ways that it directed me. And then I think there's just a motivational piece. And we when we were in the meeting yesterday doing new employee, one of the instructional coaches said, "Yeah, I just see you as the coach is going, yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this." And so I think there's the motivator piece and the passion and those things. And so that still comes out when I do talks with our staff and when I'm doing it, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's a motivational piece or an accountability piece that I'm talking about. And I'm thinking specifically about two conversations I'm going to have as we start school uh, in a couple of weeks. Um, and so I think that motivational piece, that passion piece, and I tell people all the time, Brad, when I lose that, then I'm finished. I'm stopping.
Yeah, that's so true. I really love the point you made because we talk about it a lot with teachers with when we talk about classroom management, we talk about, you know, you teach them behaviors and you allow behaviors, good or bad. But I think that's a key piece for leaders to remember too, is that like you said, if someone's, off some or not doing, or, the attitude or whatever, are we allowing that, or are we, ha- self-reflecting on it, like you said, is the key piece to that, because we, as leaders, we have to make sure that we are meeting their needs. A lot of times, especially with newer leaders, I'm like, if you have veteran staff and they're kind of negative, try to figure out why they're negative, because there's usually a reason. They've
Oh
been
yeah.
around, they've been around a long time, they've seen stuff, and so it's not necessarily because of them, but it's because of things that have happened in the past. So I think that's so important, like you said, to take the time to sit down and listen to them.
Yeah, and I think that and you said that, and that sparked a thought. When we have, and it's no different than when we talk about to kids in a classroom, and I think educators, we're real quick to say, there's a root cause for a student's behavior, and it's typically not something that's happening in the classroom, but it's something that's coming with them. Well, adults are the same way. If you have a negative person, there's a root cause to that, and so I think you have to discover that. And you said something that kind of hit me there when you said we have to sit down and listen to them. And I was at a TASA, Texas Association of School Administrators event a week or so ago, and heard this comment, Brad. And I want to see what you think about this, that we have to move from a listener to a receiver. And the listener, I think, is not as engaged as a receiver. A receiver is really, really taking in everything they say, every nonverbal that they're communicating, and we're actually getting down into the feeling level of what they're communicating to us. And I think a listener a lot of times is listening, but is listening to respond and listening to to help and do that. But when we receive, we actually get the emotional attachment, and that allows us to have empathy with somebody.
Yeah, and that's a good word. I've never thought of it that way. I try to, explain to go beyond just merely listening, be in the moment, be present, be fully. But yeah, receiving it, I think that's a really good word for that,
Yeah,
because that, just the thought of it makes you think of going much deeper.
yeah,
You're really taking in, you're not just listening, but you're taking in what they're saying, and hopefully being reflective of that. That is, yeah, I think that's a pretty good word and a pretty good way to describe that. And we don't do a good enough job with that. Sometimes, time. I mean, we can think of 100 reasons not to do that, but like you said, even as adults, especially if they're off from what they usually are, there's something going on that's not, you know, that specific issue. I say the same thing with parents. I'm like, administrators, when a parent comes in and they're mad, just listen to them and let them vent. But now I'll probably say receive. But the reality is, what they come to vent about or to complain about with the school isn't the issue. It's that they are having issues at home with little Johnny, or something like that. It's always something else. It's just easy for us to fixate on the first thing, the next thing, or an easy thing to be mad, to complain about, instead of dealing with that underlying issue. So that's a great
yeah,
point.
yeah. And I think if we don't deal with that underlying issue, then we continue to have the problem. It reoccurs.
Absolutely. And in education, it's probably worse than most places. Some of the research that we've been doing talks about education is a high agreeableness. It's a personality trait. High agreeableness is people that are kind, caring, empathetic. But those kind of people have challenges when it comes to conflict. And you think about teachers, and even a lot of administrators, they aren't good at handling conflict. And because we're not good at it, we see it as a bad thing. And we try to postpone it. And all we do when we postpone is make things 100 times worse. And so I think that's important for, leaders to understand, and even teachers to understand that, when something arises, it's uncomfortable and it's not fun, but, the sooner you can go to that person and deal with that issue, the quicker you can resolve things, or at least come to, a compromise, so that it's not something that's continually, creating a negative environment for the school, the staff, or whatever.
Yeah, and you're able to go home happy.
Ab-
And because what we know, and you know this, is that when we don't get to the root of the problem, we go home and mentally we're processing that, and it drains us, it drags our energy down, it causes us to to hesitate to go back the next day. We don't want to interact with that person, and so forth. And so I think the quicker we can get there, the freer we are to start moving forward.
Absolutely. One of the three expectations that I have for schools, one of them is I want to hear it directly from you, not from someone else. And that's what always happens. Like you said, if you go home, then you're talking to other people, and then the next morning so it'll get back to you eventually, but everybody else has heard and has formed an opinion.
Right.
So the quicker we can get to it. But yeah, like you said, that too, taking it home, one of my things is, there's not truly a work life balance. I know we use that term, but it's just life. And if you have a bad day at work, you're going to take it home, and you're going to have a bad night at home, and then you're
Oh
probably
yeah.
going to have a bad day the next day. So it's
Yeah.
it's something that is so important, like you said. To We have to do a better job of being a little bit more assertive, I think, so that it's uncomfortable, it's not easy, but it's so important to be able to do that, to go to that person, like you said, and listen, really receive, and share, and come to some kind of solution. It's like being married. One of the things I always ask is, have you ever had an argument with your spouse? I mean, and if you do, you don't just leave, hopefully. But hopefully take the time to work out a solution, a compromise or something, and then you're able to move forward.
Yeah, and Brad, I think you hit on something there that I think that from that conversation with our spouse or our partner, the person that's closest to us in our life, we we don't run from those because of the deep love and the relationship we have, and we know that that gets sticky, messy, sometimes really uncomfortable having those because of a lot of emotions come out in all of that. And I think that's what keeps us as educators from really receiving somebody's message, is that we know it's going to get emotional, it's going to get messy, it could get a little bit ugly, and ugly is not a bad word, but just ugly and sticky as we work through that. But that's what it takes to get there, and I think that's what a highly effective leader is able to do, is to navigate those conversations, receive the information from somebody, and actually process the part that's directed at them and fix themselves as they're trying to fix that situation.
Yeah, I think it is. I think a lot of times, like you say, we don't want to deal with it because it is tough. But that's the thing about relationships. A lot of times I get pushback from people because they think when I'm talking about relationships, I'm talking about just warm, fuzzy, and trying for the students to be your friends, or for the teachers to be your friend as administrator. I'm like, no, real, go look up the definition of relationship. I mean, it's work. It's kind of like marriage. Marriage is work. It's hard work, and relationships are hard work. It's really more about respect and communication and all those key pieces. So, you know, getting working through that messy stuff, that's what relationship really is. So if you're not doing that or willing to do that, then you can't really say that you are, relationship focused.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that 100%. Yeah.
All right. So changing just a little bit, I know you mentioned earlier about people that had influenced you. Was there a teacher too from your past or present that has impacted you, especially at an early age? I know a lot of times, like you said, when we feel like it's a calling or something, there's usually one or two people along the way that help us
Oh
realize
yeah. Yeah, I think there's three that I think of real quick in my high school career. Went to Breckenridge High School in Breckenridge, Texas, and Coach Hagler was my biology teacher, and and I ended up teaching biology the majority of my career, and he was also my track coach and linebacker coach, and so the relationship piece that he built with us uh, extended past just student athlete and really got to a deep piece. But he also showed the fun that you can have in a classroom and how a classroom could really be engaging. And so that piece, that's where I was actually sitting, third row back, right hand side, in the biology classroom when I made the decision I was going to teach and uh, and coach. And so I still remember the day when I was in his classroom. And then Mrs. Walker was my sophomore English teacher, and uh, and so what I remember from her was her care, her concern, and how valuable she made every single person feel. Like when you talked to her, you felt like you were the only person in the world and you believed you could do whatever because she told you you could do whatever. Um, and then Mr. Edwards was my senior English teacher, and he taught me a real valuable lesson uh, my senior year, and that is the standard's the standard. You're going to do it, and if you don't do it, you're going to fail. And I didn't follow through on some things, and I tried to fake my way through it. And he looked at me and he said, "Wade, you didn't read the book, did you?" And I said, "No, sir, I didn't." He goes, "Okay, you can go sit down." And I failed for 6 weeks senior English because I didn't read the book and I couldn't pass the book report. And we had to do a written, and then we had to come up and discuss the book with him. And I tried to fake my way through it, Brad. And so I learned in that when somebody tells you you have to do this, you have to do that. And that has really driven home for me that when we say this is our standard in the district, this is our standard. And you're going to help people get there, but there's no compromising that standard, because once you compromise the standard, you have reestablished a new standard and it's lower.
Your story just reminded me of someone I interviewed last week, and he was talking about he was in like sixth or seventh grade, and he had a teacher that said, if you feel like you're a leader and you're going to be a leader, one day stand up. And he said, of course, he stood up, and she said, no, you need to sit down. And he was like, I don't know if that was, good or bad. I said, no, think about it for a minute. And it's like we were talking about with relationship earlier. True relationship is being honest. And sometimes you love someone and care enough about them to tell them the truth. And sometimes the truth is hard, and sometimes the truth is tough. And that's an important piece of relationship. That's a piece that, our culture doesn't really like anymore.
Oh
but
yeah.
even as leaders, we want people around us that are going to, let us know when we're off, or to challenge things to help us grow and be our best.
Yeah, and exactly right. And I think, Brad, as you're talking about that, if you can't have that real conversation with somebody, do you really have a relationship with them? Is it
It's
really a relationship? You know, if you can't, then you probably don't have a relationship. And I tell our team all the time. I tell them all the time that if we're setting in, and we call them collaboratives instead of meetings, because we
mm,
want collaboration in them. And I'm just I, I get hung up on words, and I think words are powerful, and I think to set the tone. And so in our collaboratives, I tell them, if everybody in this room is agreeing with me every single time, then somebody's lying, because I am not that smart. I don't know that much. And so I have stupid ideas, and somebody needs to say, that's not a good idea.
Absolutely. And I love that, the clever. I may have to steal that one, because and I'm like that. I'm like you. Words really matter, and that's why, when I use some, I'm like, it may not mean what you think, but there is a specific reason. So, but that is I like that, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's if you don't have the people around you that want the best for you, they'll never speak up and let you know. It's like I shared with him with his teacher. She could have let him stood up and said, "Yeah, okay," but she knew she was doing him a disservice by that. And
Yeah,
he's
and by that honest conversation, it probably caused him to reflect and grow and become better.
of course, because he remembers it 30 years later. I mean, so that's impactful. And that's part of what we want to be is impactful. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And same thing with you. You realize with him, hey, he told me the truth and
Yeah.
that's what
Oh, yeah.
happened.
Is that what happened? Yeah.
What do you see is when we think about leaders today, especially new leaders, and you've been around long enough to see them develop different ones and come into roles. What do you see often is maybe one or two of what you would consider maybe not weaknesses, but areas that they don't really seem prepared or as effective with their leadership?
Yeah. So I think the first one is emotional intelligence.
Mm,
The ability, number one, to when I think about emotional intelligence, I think is their ability to understand their emotions and how their emotions impact others.
mm,
And I think that as a great leader, we have to control our emotions, and we talk to our team that the hardest person they're ever going to lead is themselves.
mm.
That's the hardest person to lead, and so we've got to get our emotions under control to be able to lead. We have to know when to be soft. We have to know when to push. We have to know when to pull somebody close and just have that empathetic conversation. And we talk about this in our district, and we got to know when we just need to turn around and kick them in the butt and say, "Hey, you got to get over that, and we got to go." And so there's a piece that you have to know that inside of yourself, so that you're not just using one emotion all the time, and because then it becomes a hammer. And then I think the other part of emotional intelligence is um, really being able to read other people's emotions and read the room and understand what impact you're having, and being able to shift when you see that you've pushed too hard or they're not receiving it, or whatever. So I think that's one area that's really important. And I think the other piece that I really work with young leaders on is is truly understanding who they are as a leader and what they value as a leader. They have to know who they are. They have to know their values. If they don't, then there's nothing to stand on. And so they have to know it. In our superintendent's course with Dr. Kalos, he told us you can't die on every hill.
Right,
And so,
right.
so yeah, you have to know what's important in your life. You have to know what the non-negotiables are. Everything can't be a non-negotiable. And so I think they have to truly understand who they are as a leader.
It's funny, and I also think of the flip side of that where people always say, pick your battle, but they never do. I'm like, sometimes you have to, something is worth taking a stand for, even if you're standing alone.
It
So, yeah,
is.
both of
Yeah.
those extremes are so true.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were talking about reading other people is so important, and I'm with you. I think the EQ, the emotional intelligence, and building relationships is really foundational, and I think that's an area that a lot do struggle with. If you aren't sure, walk into your teachers' classrooms and see how they look when you walk in. Because I remember talking to someone, they're like, I had a principal once that when he walked in your room, most teachers were like, just had that frightened look. And I'm like, yeah, that's not the
Yeah.
kind of, reaction you want from a leader. You want them to,
Yeah.
be
And I tell our principals, if that happens when I walk into a classroom, it's indicating to me that I haven't been in the classroom enough.
right.
Or there's something I've projected upon them that I didn't mean to project on them. And so there's all of those pieces. And so, yeah, I think that is a great way to look at it, to see what they look like when you walk in their classroom.
Well, and especially like you said, being in there often enough, because if you're not and you go in, the first thing they're thinking, "Uh-oh, what'd I do? What's wrong?" That kind of thing. And I just think it's so important that for administrators, like you said, just to be real, to see them as humans first. One of the things I hate, and talk about it often and tweet about it pretty often is, something as simple as when you want to meet with them and you send them an email or a message, let them know what it's about. It's like almost a power struggle or something when they want them to, like, because we know teachers beat themselves up more than anyone else. They are their own worst critic. And, anytime, I also think that most teachers are very high in conscientiousness. So when you say, "Hey, I need to meet," it may be for a good reason, but they're automatically going to start thinking, "What did I do wrong? What did I not do right?" And worry about that and ruminate on it all day. Especially, I've had them tell me, "Yeah, my principal sent me, an email on Friday afternoon that they wanted to meet me Monday," and I'm like, "That is just mean."
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's just mean because, their whole weekend was ruined, and it might have been for a good reason, who knows, but, just little things like that that I think so important as leaders to be cognizant of.
Yeah, Brad, I think there's a couple things in there I'd like to dig in real quick, but I think that piece that to let them know why, because it does become a power struggle. Me, can you come meet me in my office? Well, we, if somebody sends me that, I'm replaying every conversation I had during the day, going, what did I say? What has caused this? I think the other piece, and this is something we've implemented in our district. I think we're probably going into our second and a half year of doing this. I think um, we stop all communication, professional communications, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon,
I
and
love it.
we do not allow another communication until 7 o'clock the next morning. So there is nothing going on, and that is hard on Friday afternoon because at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon you can't send a professional communication until 7 o'clock Monday morning. Now, what has happened is our inboxes start filling up at 7 o'clock because people still do the work and they schedule the emails. But here's what we heard from that is one of our leader's husband said it is the best thing to happen to our marriage. Now think about that for a second, because now that leader was free to be able to be a mom, a wife, all those things. And you talked about work, home balance. There is no balance. We actually talk rhythm in our district. So we got to find the right rhythm. John Gordon kind of coined that phrase, and I got it from him. But there's rhythm. So when, like tonight, we've got a special board meeting at 5:30. So the rhythm for me is longer today than it is normally, but I'll be at work longer. And so when I'm here, I've got to be here. I got to be where my feet are, and I've got to be engaged. But when I go home tonight, my wife Marla is expecting me to have my feet in the house and not to be a superintendent, to but to be the best husband I can be. And so I have to dedicate and be where my feet are. And so then when I'm there, I need to be there. And it may be a shorter amount of time, but I need to be there. So I like that word rhythm more than I like balance.
Yeah, and I like that, and I love that y'all do that, and I just wanna reemphasize to all the leaders out there listening that you can stop at 5 p.m. You can make that, across the board, and that your staff, even your administrators, will appreciate that because you're absolutely right. Because it goes back to what I was saying, especially like we tend to be high in agreeableness. Is if that email comes at 6, we have to read it. We will have to reply. If they send it, because a lot of people are like, well, they can send it and just don't open it. That's not how we're wired as
Mm-mm,
educators. If
mm-mm.
it comes at 6, we're like, oh, this must be important, or they wouldn't have sent it at 6 o'clock. And so, yeah, having that cutoff is kind of like the same thing with self care, and I want to talk to you about in a minute. But I'm like, you know, it's not enough for administrators to just say, teachers, you need to self care. You have to model it because they're not going to, especially if they don't see you modeling it, because they're going to think, well, I've got something else to do, another lesson plan, on and on. But like you said, man, when you get home, when you walk in that door, you have to be fully present for that part of your life too. And otherwise we burn out, and that's one of the reasons we see so much burnout.
Oh yeah, and so I just think that's real important. And just quickly, when I first introduced this to our administrative team, campus principals, central office staff, they said, "Well, we can't do that. We just can't do that. I can't work." And I said, "I'm not telling you you can't do some stuff. You're just not going to communicate the stuff." And they said, "But I got to get it off my plate. I got to get it off my plate." And I said, "Okay." I said, "So let me give you this example." I said, "If I send y'all a text at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night and say, 'Hey, I was wondering about XYZ. Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it tomorrow.'" I said, "Do all of y'all look at the text and go, 'Oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm not gonna worry about that. We're gonna talk about it.'" Every one of them looked at me with that crazed look and said, "No." We start thinking, "What's wrong? What's going on?
Exactly.
What's happening?" I said, "Do you think your teachers are not doing the same thing?" And then every one of them gave me that look like, "Oh, yeah." And so that's where we started making the change. And I think that says, you got to show the impact to the person so they can understand why it impacts other people. So they saw the
Right.
impact it was having to them directly. And then they said, okay, I need to pass that on to my staff too.
I love it. So that's a great piece for self-care, is, especially even as a superintendent, mandating kind of this is what we're going to do, and we get, and that's probably one of the best things you could do for self-care. But what else do you do? Is there a couple of things you do to kind of
Yeah.
recharge
Yeah.
and refuel?
Yeah. Yeah. So I, I hope all this makes sense. It's in my head, and I tell my team all the time, it sounds real good in my head, but when it comes out, it may not sound near as good. But I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier in conversation. So I made a decision early on in the superintendency, and I don't think I did as good a job as an assistant superintendent. I know I didn't do as good a job as a principal of having conversations I know I need to have. Like when I know I need to have a conversation, I'm going to have the conversation. I'm going to have the grace, the mercy. I'm going to have love and care that it needs to have, but I'm going to have the conversation because at the end of the day, and I kid about this, somebody's going to go home happy and somebody's going to go home mad. And I'm choosing to go home happy. And there was so much of my career, I would avoid a conversation and I'd go home and I'd beat myself up over that constantly. I should have had that conversation. Should have had that conversation. Why didn't I do that? And then I just play that over in my head. And that conversation never turned out like it did in my head. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to have it. So now when I need to have a conversation, I have a conversation so that I can go home and I can unplug. And so then that's the piece that I'm committed to is 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'm headed to the house unless we have a meeting. I'm just committed to it. And, and I'm going home without work. And
Love it.
go ahead, jump,
Oh, I
jump
was going
in.
to say I love it. Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's, and you're modeling that for everybody else.
And I tell everybody that. And so I do that. And then for my administrative team, I'm asking them, what time are you going home? You need to be out of this building. I tell our new to profession teachers, you can shut down. The work is never going to get finished. You're never
Right.
going to finish it. So pick a time, go home, get out of here. You're still going to be a great teacher. You're still going to do those things. And so then it's going to the house, being where my feet are, trying hard to dedicate time to my wife and do those things that I need to do to give her value. I'm still a work in progress on that. We've been married for a long time, but I'm still a work in progress on it. She'd tell you, I'm glad she's not on this podcast because she'd be telling you, she'd be saying, well, he needs to work on that more. But I'm working on that. And then I think it's what I do for my self care is to make sure that I'm ready for the day. I begin my day and I begin it pretty early. I wake up at 4:30 on a work day, and the first part of my day, non-negotiable, is that I spend time, and I call it quiet time. Some people call it meditation. Some people call it just being still. But I have a structure to it where I have some devotional material that I read, and I spend approximately an hour And what that does, Brad, is that gets my heart and my mind in the right space for me and in tuned with the way I want my day to go. And then when I get through with that, the minute I get through that, because I have a specific devotional that I do last, as soon as I get through that, I close my computer, I get up and I change into my workout clothes. And at about 6 a.m., I'm on my Peloton bike and I've got a 30-minute workout that I say some mornings, like this morning, is not going to be very hard. And then I end up working out really extremely hard, harder than I thought I was going to. But I get my exercise in at that point, and then I get dressed. And when I get in my pickup, I back out of my garage. I put my school badge on. And when I put my pickup into drive to head down about a mile of dirt road before I get onto the highway, I start one of 4 podcasts that are about 3 to 4 minutes long, each one of them. And I listen to 4 podcasts, either on the way to work or when I finish up when I get to work. And they are motivational, self-help, leadership podcasts. And then I get my day. And that really stages me for my day. And all of that is part of my self-care, just taking care of myself from home and rest and sleep to the spiritual side, to the exercise side, to the growth side and the leadership and kind of that pep talk going into the day.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. And that, because it is, like you said, how you start the day really frames the whole day. And so to
It
start
does,
with
and it allows me that when chaos hits, because it does hit, I'm in a better frame of mind to handle it.
right. Yeah. Not overwhelmed. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Last question, real quick. And this is the toughest one. This is lattes and leaders. So, what's your hot beverage of choice? Coffee, latte, cappuccino, none of the above?
Coffee.
Good old coffee. All right.
Coffee, black, no cream. That's what I like, and I'll be very honest. On weekends, it's I like whole beans, and I grind the beans,
Okay.
and I
Yeah.
make the coffee fresh, and I like a Southern pecan coffee.
That's awesome. All right. Well, you know what? I appreciate you so much for coming on. I love your story. I love the great insight you have, and I think have seen enough and done enough to be able to offer some really good nuggets, especially to some new leaders today and even teachers. The importance of self care and really listening and developing those relationships. So, thank you so much for being on today.
Well, man, I appreciate it. It's been fun for me. Like I said, I grow when I do this because just interacting with you, it really sharpens. I like the phrase iron sharpens iron. And so these conversations make me better, and I appreciate it so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
This has been Lattes and Leaders with Dr. Brad Johnson. We hope that you leave today feeling informed and inspired. For more educational content, be sure to add this podcast to your list and follow Dr. Johnson on any and all social media platforms. For more information on Dr. Johnson, Jeremy Johnson, and special guest, check out drbradjohnson.com. That is DOCTOR, bradjohnson.com. Hope to have you back soon.